Mackenzie was very involved in the early days of the company. Tell us about their history.
Yeah, well, they met at D.E. Shaw, the Wall Street hedge fund. I believe she worked with Jeff when they met. They got married. She helped Jeff decide to become an entrepreneur, that legendary drive to the Northwest, to Seattle, where he was writing the business plan. And in those early years, I mean, she really, maybe not formally, but she did work at Amazon. She kept the books. She would help drive packages to the post office, and she would interview. Like, I remember an early employee saying that Jeff, he was friendly with Jeff. Jeff didn't want to hire him because he thought he was playing too much ultimate frisbee, and Mackenzie convinced him that it was sort of okay to bring him aboard. So she played a key role in those early years. Of course, not really over the last 2 decades. Certainly in that first chapter.
Now, obviously, Bloomberg keeps great records on the wealth of the wealthiest individuals. So if you go to Rich Go on the Bloomberg, you can see the list of the world's wealthiest people. And there's a chart here that gives us a different, more visual view. Anders, there's a possible settlement underway. We have no idea how the fortunes will ultimately be divided. But under Washington state law, is it true that she's entitled to half of everything he owns, including a stake in Amazon, which is 16%?
So what we know so far is that the Washington state law is set up to divide things quite equitably between spouses when it comes to property that is acquired or attained during a marriage. How this is actually going to play out, though, is we'll essentially have to see. There could be a prenup that's in place. If that's the case, then obviously they've already decided what's going to happen. And also this law that things should be split equitably or equally only applies if there's no agreement already in place. And we've seen in prior divorces when there have been couples that are worth quite a bit of money, that there's many ways you can slice and dice fortunes that are that large.
So, Brad, Bezos also owns a couple of other companies, Blue Origin, the Washington Post. You know, this presumably impacts all of this, right? Because his interests over the years have changed.
It does, but I think we have to take their statement at face value, you know, that they continue to be partners as parents in future initiatives going forward, like their philanthropy. You know, I see this as probably an amicable and very mature separation. It's also, you know, true that if this were a different company, if, say, the activist shareholders were circling and there was a question of kind of control, that this would be a bigger deal. But it's Amazon. It's the most respected and admired company in the world. And you don't even hear activist shareholder being in the same breath as the company or its leadership. So, you know, I don't see any potential dilution of his control as being significant.
Right, and I do want to emphasize, they say they will continue to live their lives as friends. If they could do it all over again, they would. That said, we can't avoid the conversations about the wealth. So, Anders, you know, is it possible that if, you know, depending on how this shakes out, she could become the world's richest woman? She
could. The stake right now, or Bezos' net worth right now, is about $137 billion, split in half. That's about $69 billion that they would each end up with. And that would put her ahead of François Bettencourt of L'Oreal and Alice Walton, and would make her the world's richest woman.
What is the sort of precedent here with past billionaire breakups?
So we've seen things go both ways. For example, Sergey Brin at Alphabet divorced in 2015, kept all his shares in the company then. Larry Ellison of Oracle has been divorced several times and still has his stake in Oracle. On the other side of the coin, there is Steve Wynn, who split seemingly amicable with Elaine, but then things turned sour around 2011 when Steve got remarried, and they eventually ended up in court. Then there's also oil billionaire Harold Hamm, who went through a rather nasty divorce proceeding in court with his wife and ended up cutting her a $972 million check. But while in court, he was fighting to keep an even bigger share of the roughly $17 billion fortune.
And, you know, then of course there's the question of what she would do with her, you know, newly independent wealth. Brad, Lorraine Powell Jobs has become quite a force in philanthropic investing and also for-profit investing at Emerson Collective, which now has like hundreds of employees. What do you imagine that she will do?
I don't think we know enough to say. I mean, right now, she's an accomplished novelist. She's written 2 well-received books. She runs an anti-bullying organization. But, she's been a private person for the last decade or two. We haven't heard much from her. Occasionally we have.
Right. She's actually talked about how she doesn't love, social gatherings and,
Right.
many small conversations, which you imagine she would have been subjected to as the
Oh, yes. And she gave one interview, I remember, to Vogue magazine before one of her books came out. But she's been a private person, so we really don't know, other than what they said in their statement, which is that they'll continue to be partners in some of these other philanthropic initiatives.